Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much to Governor Hochul for joining us and for starting us off on such a strong note. My name is Emmy Liss. I'm here as a child care policy advisor with Five Borough Institute. As we dive into a really exciting afternoon of discussion, we want to start by sort of setting the stage. Why is childcare such a challenge for families in New York City? What impact is that having on families' ability to stay here and raise their children here? And ultimately, how does that impact our economy? So we are going to call our first panel up to the stage. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Eliza Shapiro, our moderator, a journalist who writes frequently about affordability issues, including childcare. And I'm going to call our full panel up to join her.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so excited to be moderating this panel with this very illustrious group of working moms. I just came from a very weird preschool tour, so I'm feeling really eager to dive in. I'm a reporter on the Metro desk of the Times, and I was sort of given this very amorphous beat that my boss called affordability like 2.5 years ago, and I was like, okay, what does that mean? And it became very clear to me very quickly what it meant, which is that basically my beat is childcare. My beat is really about how it's like gotten so much harder to live and raise a family here, and the centrality of childcare to that beat has surprised me, and the way that the politics in the city have shifted around it so quickly have really surprised me, and so it's really exciting. I feel like we're all at the vanguard of something that feels like it's actually about to change. One thing that has really struck me just as I think about this issue is how often I encounter people who feel like they're doing everything right. They make good money, they have good jobs. This is the city they've always wanted to live in and be in, yet once they start having a kid, as people have said before, the city is no longer a place where they can stay. And that, I think, it's just obviously such an existential issue for the future of the city. As has also been noted, we have this huge issue of supply and demand. Families are paying more than they can afford. Childcare workers are some of the lowest paid workers in our city, not working for anyone. So I think we basically all know something has to give here, and I would love to invite our panelists to share some ideas. So briefly, we have Julie Samuels, the president and CEO of Tech NYC, which represents the tech industry in New York. We have Rebecca Balin, the executive director of New Yorkers United for Childcare, movement of parents and would-be parents fighting for universal childcare. And we have council member Jennifer Gutierrez, who represents the 34th district, which includes Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Ridgewood in the city council. Rebecca, I wanted to start off just asking you to set the scene for us a little bit. In your work organizing parents over the last few years, many of whom I've had the opportunity to speak to, what are the top concerns and challenges you're hearing, and what has surprised or struck you most?
Yeah. Well, you said it, so I can leave. Well, thanks for having us here to talk about this. And I think first I want to just set the scene for why we are organizing parents. And we were founded almost 2 years ago when the mayor was cutting 3K. 3K was on the chopping block, and nobody was breaking down the mayor's door. Nobody was screaming at him. And I realized that's because nobody was organizing parents and would-be parents to save 3K and to create more universal child care programs. And in less than 2 years, we've organized 10,000 parents. We helped to win back $167 million in permanent funding for 3K for the first time since Mayor Adams was in office. We even won $10 million for the first expansion to universal child care seats for 0 to 2-year-olds. So this is the first expansion since 2018, since 3K. So, and this is because, and people are flocking to be organized to do this work because it is an incredibly resonant issue for people who are either parents currently thinking about becoming parents, people who are sick of their friends leaving New York when they become parents, grandparents, aunties and uncles who are helping, right? And the top issue the only main issue is, sorry, the top issue is affordability. It is too expensive. We've heard, it costs $20,000, but often more a year per kid. And that is unsustainable. We talk to parents who, there's a parent is a family in Queens who was telling us that they had to go into credit card debt to pay for childcare. Actually, we've heard that quite a bit. We have a dad we work with in Brooklyn who has to work part-time because he can't, even on his full-time salary, afford childcare and for full-time childcare. So supplements that by working only part-time, and still had to go into his retirement to pay for it. Another parent we work with, she told us, made this great announcement of this amazing milestone she hit. Her kid turned 4 and she surpassed $100,000 in childcare costs. And I had a kid 4 months ago who just went into daycare, and I'll let him know you all clapped for him. He'll be thrilled. And I'm starting to pay $32,000 a year in childcare. And as you said, Eliza, these are families who, this is not just impacting the working poor. Obviously, disproportionately it is. This is impacting, though, people who make good salaries, who have good jobs. And these are all people who haven't actually left the city. And we've heard that stat, right? People are leaving the city and the state because they can't afford the cost of childcare. And when families have to make these decisions, when families have to leave New York before they put down roots for decades to come, that's a policy failure. And that's why we're organizing for the policy solution of universal childcare.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I'll ask our other panelists. We're going to move briskly.
Sorry.
You're great. I wanted to ask the councilwoman to jump in and tell us a little bit about what you hear from your constituents. I think you represent a really interesting swath of the city, a little commie corridor, a little super not commie corridor. And then tell us a little bit about your council legislation and what your hopes are.
Yeah, I mean, my district is a wonderful district. I represent parts of Williamsburg, the South Side, Bushwick, and parts of Ridgewood in Queens. And the reason that I ran was because there were a number of providers, educators at a specific daycare, shout out to Nuestros Niños, who had seen me kind of grow up and were like, why wouldn't you run? And so they really pushed me to run, and there was no strings attached to their support. They were just like, we love you, we want you to take this seat. Antonio, who's my predecessor, was wonderful. You understand all the issues. And then I was pregnant when I ran for the first time. I had my child, and I just assumed that the village would come and take my child and raise this child while I was at work, and that was not the case. I was on a waiting list, and I have a wonderful home-based provider who is in the district in Bushwick. But I realized that I'm someone that I was making more money than I was, just a year before. I spoke English. I navigated the internet pretty easily, and I couldn't find a place. I couldn't find a place that I could afford. It was not in my neighborhood in Bushwick, and so the legislation really was born out of kind of that experience, selfishly but not selfishly. It was to really say, if I'm someone that would acknowledge I have privilege in this space, what happens to those that don't have these resources, that don't have these privileges? And then as we started to workshop the legislation, because it was more than just let's create this plan and all of our problems will be solved, right? It was we need to be thoughtful about a plan for 0 to 5. UPK and 3K works. How can we invest? How can we work with all the agencies to look at birth trends, to look at zip codes where there is a daycare desert? It's really comprehensive. But also on the other and very important piece was, how do we reform this industry? Like you mentioned, so many of the providers are underpaid, and many of them are women of color, immigrant women, who do this job not because they think that they'll ever have enough to retire, but because they truly love working in early childhood education. So the bill was born out of kind of my experience, the providers, the women in my district who supported me, and I just couldn't walk away from the very real scenario where they're not making enough. For many of them, their own children don't even qualify in the center that they teaching. And so it is a challenge, and this involves them having to like bring a grandma from DR, and like, it's too much. You're having to take matters into your own hands in a way that government should be solving for. And so that's really like the energy behind it.
Thank you. Julie, who helped me with my story that I wrote about who can have 3 kids in New York. Julie Samuels.
Traumatizing.
Julie, as someone who's like spends a lot of time talking to employers, trying to figure out how to attract companies and keep them here, what kind of concerns are you hearing about childcare? And like, just talk a little bit about your level of concern for the city's economy if we don't get more accessible childcare.
Yeah, I'm going to take this from a tech angle, of course, given Tech NYC, and we're sitting here in Etsy, and I think this is true across industries. But in tech in particular, the tech industry has been, from an economic development point of view, a real shining light in the city, especially for the past 10 years, especially since COVID, growing jobs at a rate significantly faster than any other industry. And they're by and large good jobs. And that's really important. But the thing I'm going to say here is that historically, tech was a very young workforce, and it is now, I don't want to say aging because it still skews much younger, but it is like people who are having kids now and who are, they moved here, they lived with a bunch of people, or maybe they finished college and they had fake walls and 1 million people in an apartment, and that was great, but now, they're here. And what we have found, and this is true with regard to housing as well as childcare, by the way, is, even early stage tech employees who make low 6-figure salaries are having an increasingly hard time cutting it. And Rebecca, as you said, or I can't remember, one of you said very eloquently, like obviously for the working poor, I don't want to mince words. It is a much more acute problem for people who don't have resources, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem for the city when it goes up and down the stack. And and then I will move on because I know we have a lot of things we want to talk about, but I will just say that the trick to tech and keeping the tech economy humming here is that tech companies will go where the people they want to hire are. Full stop. More than any other industry, it is mobile. More than any, we saw that during COVID. All these companies fled San Francisco after 2021. It was shocking. The companies really just want to hire people, and they want them to be in person. And if the people they want to hire are here, they will stay here. And so, and I'm so glad we're having a little bit of my own PTSD around a lot of these issues, not least of all raising 3 kids in New York with my working all the time and all the things. But I would just say that the affordability conversation we're having, to me, childcare is the most important part. Housing is incredibly important, and obviously it's a 3-legged stool or many-legged stool. I don't know, but most people I know in tech, the difference in housing costs is important, but it's not a deal breaker. Right. But these costs associated with childcare, with education, those numbers are so big that those numbers are deal breakers, even for really, what we think of as really good jobs.
Yeah, totally. That's really helpful. I was going to ask the councilwoman also just to talk a little bit about the politics of this issue. I'm just like reflecting on the governor saying, the likely next mayor and I are really serious and about creating universal childcare and talking about this in the state of the state. It seems like we're at sort of a precipice moment. That reminds me a little bit, Rich Beery was here for this, of like 2013, 2014, thinking about the beginning of UBK, but obviously on a much broader scale. So talk to us a little bit about like how you see the path for building more consensus around this issue, and how you've sort of seen the politics shift and what your hopes are for this next chapter.
Thank you. I think this is an interesting question also for the comptroller, Brad Lander, who's here, who's been phenomenal. He was so helpful to us in the legislation. But I think before this kind of like, Mamdani prioritizing childcare, the governor as well, I think there was a sprinkle in city government. Obviously, the de Blasio administration did amazing work with UPK and 3K. The amount of like conservative Republicans, colleagues of mine, that are like, that's the best thing he did. And I'm like, it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear. But I think that there just wasn't this cohesion. I don't think there was an urgency. I think, and to be honest, I think it in many ways continues to be like a woman's issue. So unless there are these like policymakers that are going to say, okay, but it's also everyone's benefit. It's also everyone's opportunity to gain from, whether you are a parent, whether you are someone who never wants to have kid, but you live in any community, in any neighborhood in New York City. We have everything to gain from ensuring universal childcare, for making it accessible to every single person, every single family, regardless of immigration status, regardless of income. We have everything to gain, right? Just allowing people to go back to work, allowing these businesses to thrive, really paying these workers a fair and equitable wage. We have everything to gain. So I think what's happening now is that there is the council's first women majority, and I think we've had a record amount of babies at the council. Brad, I don't know, like last year we had like 5 babies. Like it was really, I think the speaker's head was going to explode. She's like, there's a lot of you having babies, and it was all, but I think it has to do with the fact that now we are all these folks that are in a position of policy making and understand, wow, this is not just my neighbor's issue. This is my issue. So I think that is what's changing. I also think that Zoran's campaign made it really sexy to care about affordability in a way that just had not resonated with young people. And I represent Bushwick, y'all. I represent parts of Williamsburg. And these are amazing neighborhoods, but famously unaffordable. And there are, my families who were displaced, who were like, we couldn't afford to live here because of the housing, and who's gonna take care of my kids? So I think what's happening is that there's this shift. It is a lot more normalized nationally. We're hearing success stories out of New Mexico, for example. And I just think that as New Yorkers, we don't ever want to be second. Right? We are dying to be first. And there is opportunities that we are missing if we don't do this in the best possible way, if we don't make it universal. So I think that it's what's happening. There was political will that we just didn't have. There wasn't this momentum. Childcare was viewed as a women's issue. And now all those things are still very true, but now there is an urgency because now people are like, can't afford childcare. I also can't afford housing. I also can't afford healthcare. I also can't afford groceries. Something's got to give. Government, where are you at? And I think this is the moment. This is where we're at right now.
And I want to just jump in quickly and say, the fact that Councilmember Gutierrez was ahead of the curve and was introducing this bill as the movement was sort of brewing beneath the surface, but it wasn't until elected officials, and I think you would agree, need constituents who are ready to back you up and stand with you and also call your colleagues and say, this is my priority. And so by organizing parents, New Yorkers United for Childcare is making it very clear to the elected officials in office that this is their main priority, because in theory, in a democracy, they exist to listen to the constituents and the concerns that they're calling them about. And so I think that is also what's going on.
Julie, I wanted to ask you, I think the governor was just saying, I wish more tech companies had taken us up on this. I feel like I hear a lot of interest when I go to these panels from the private sector about helping or being involved, but a lot of people say I don't exactly know how. How do we get one hand talking to the other in this moment of kind of opportunity?
Well, I think I think that's a really good question. I think it's a little bit complicated because, at Tech NYC, when we started the organization, the first few years we worked on tech policy. We worked on issues around data privacy and stuff that you would think of as wonky tech-y stuff. Yeah, sexy. I don't know about sexy, but but over the course of the last decade, we've really expanded into a lot of issues that I think of more in this livability bucket, because it's an industry of New Yorkers. And so I think we've started to see the shift. The fact that this room even exists today is actually a big part of that. Now, Etsy has always been a leader in this. Etsy, oh my God, perfect. I know. Perfect. Yeah, I know, it hurts. Okay, so I think that's a big piece of this. I think organizing the parents, listen, if you are worried about moving the C-suite of a company on this, you've got to come at it from 2 ways. Number one, not unlike the kind of political movements you're talking about in the more traditional electoral sense, you also need to do it in the business sense. You need people bothering up the chain. This is important, because for, any given CEO, there's a million things that come across his or her plate every day. And, you've got to give them the ammunition. You have to bake it for them. This is why you have to care. This is why this is important than the 20 other things that are on your desk. So there's organizing within, and then there's organizations like mine. There's organizations like the Partnership. Kathy had an op-ed with Reshma Sanjani and the Daily News, I think just yesterday on this, that also comes across. We talk to a lot of people at the companies and we're like, guys, this can really happen now. This is worth your time now because we're on the precipice of getting something done. And the thing is about everyone who works in tech in New York, and I think this is true of every industry, is I said this already, it's made up of New Yorkers, and people want New Yorkers to be first. They want New Yorkers to win. I don't know anyone I work with in this type of work who doesn't want New York to be a better place for New Yorkers. And so when we talk about it in that context, I think that's the way to get that message across.
Rebecca, I wanted to end with you and just give us kind of a hopeful outlook on what you think would be like a few elements of like what would in a year, if we're all sitting here, like what does a stronger, more robust childcare system look like in the short to medium term?
So ultimately, we think that we need a universal childcare, but it's not this pie in the sky thing, right? We have it for 3 and 4-year-olds. We need to expand it down. We have a campaign right now for New York City to win 2Care. So let's get free childcare for 2-year-olds. That is possible. We can do it. We believe that universal childcare should be free for all. It should be birth to 5 or have some significant paid leave. And I really want to uplift Etsy's paid leave policy because that is childcare policy as well. And it should be all day. It needs to a full work day for parents, or at least for many parents. It should be nearby their home because in New York City especially, you're not driving and you can't just plop a 4-month-old on a bus by themselves. So in order to get to work, you need that to be nearby. And it should be very easy to apply, just like K through 12. And ultimately, I just want to emphasize that if we believe that K through 12 should be public and is a collective responsibility, there is no reason, absolutely no reason. And in fact, it is even more important to make sure that we also have public care, public quality care with well-paid caregivers for 0 to 5-year-olds as well.
Thank you. This is such a helpful panel. I'm just like struck by, I feel like I have like a million story ideas just listening to you guys, and just like how much this is a moment where it just feels like things may actually change. It doesn't actually like come along that often. So it's just like really interesting. So I want to thank our panelists for a fantastic introduction.
Thank you guys.